I'm going to go ahead and be completely honest with Kyle here for a second. If you take George Martin out of the equation, this is a much closer battle, in my opinion.
I think it's a close battle no matter what.
I mean, I really don't, but I think it would be without George Martin. That's where I'm at.
I think the problem with it is, and I agree with you. I was going to honestly bring it up from this. There's a different management and different mentorship between what George Martin did in the formative years of the Beatles, and even when they were in their experimental time, and what guys like Andrew Long Oldham did when he was running the Stones.
Yeah, but in the day, that's true. But in the last couple albums of the Beatles, a lot of people think that Let It Be was the last Beatles album. It was only the next to last. They just released it later, right? And so Let It Be was made before Abbey Road, right? And then was released after Abbey Road because they weren't pleased with it. They let Phil Spector have a go at it, as we know. And anyway, so that's what we found out could happen is when Phil Spector's version of Let It Be is kind of what the Beatles would be, but they produced their own stuff. George Martin was dissatisfied with them on Abbey Road, and he basically let them do what they wanted, and he occasionally chime in. And really, the engineer Glenn Johns did more on that album than, from what I've seen in the documentary. Glenn Johns, who has also produced Pink Floyd and the Eagles, seemed to do more.
Balls Out Podcast.
Hey, Bob, do you want me to depress you really quick?
Yeah, what's up?
That game is almost 20 years old.
Oh, it's yeah.
That is so ridiculous to me.
Oh, I bought it at Goodwill.
What did you want to talk about, Kyle?
I want to have a nice, good old Beatles Stones throwdown tonight.
We're definitely going to have that conversation, and I can't wait till we do our top 10 videos of the 80s. That is going to be one of the greatest conversations that you and I will ever have.
I think we got a nice eclectic mix. I think we came at it from different prisms, and I think that it's going to be phenomenal. And I found in my 45s, I still have the Aha 45 take on me. I still have.
Oh wow!
Wow.
That's one of my daughter's favorite songs. She loves that video.
Come on, Phil.
And I have a feeling we're going to be talking about that video quite a bit in that conversation. But tonight is a very, very a subject near and dear to my heart, and that is the Fab Four versus those little rich boys from across the tracks there, the Rolling Stones.
No denying that. It's pretty interesting, though. Like, when you look at the public perceptions, the Beatles became...
Do you know where I got that before I jump, dude? Do you know where I got that observation from? The fact that the Beatles were, from that working class group versus the Rolling Stones, which, those were all kids that came from money. I got that observation from Ozzy Osbourne, of all people.
Oh, yeah. No, that's well known. I mean, I found it ironic how, remember the Beatles when they started, this is like prior to their explosion, they were that grungy, gritty band that was running through Hamburg, Germany, and they got polished up to be this, hot. I'm going to use the term boy band because in essence, that's what they were. But again, there was nothing like it. Like, none of us here were alive February 64 that could say, like, hey, I watched the Sullivan Show and I saw this and it was just the next coolest thing of all time.
Yes.
But they turned into that. The Stones got role played into being the bad boys. And even both sides even wish they could have done a little bit of the other, too. It's just interesting dynamic between the two.
Well, and when you say that though, I kind of get the feeling that maybe Lennon wanted to have that bad boy image a little bit more than McCartney, and I think their songwriting reflects that.
Oh yeah, you look at
McCartney's over there writing songs about his the childhood a childhood sweetheart from 5 years ago, or whatever, versus John Lennon openly talking about heroin with "Happiness Is a Warm Gun." Come on, guys.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, and I think I hate to use the Eagles line from Hotel California, "the prisoners of their own devices," but I think the reason the Beatles ended up combusting is they became prisoners of their own devices. And Shannon, I always say where Lennon, in my opinion, wanted to become that bad boy of music during his solo careers. You remember I think it was his album Rock and Roll. He has that like punk leather jacket on.
I
He's
was just fixing to bring that up, and I'm glad you did.
that album to me was him trying to get outside the comfort zone. A lot of people didn't like it because they were so used to, the Plastic Ono band, Imagine. But that album is one of my favorite of John Lennon's solo catalog.
Yes, I really now I liked Double Fantasy, except for the fact that part of the Double Fantasy is that Yoko Ono was allowed to put songs on it and sing. Now, I don't want to go on a Yoko Ono rant here, but
I would love to actually have a conversation about Yoko Ono because I feel maybe not necessarily early on when she was, as a lot of people judged it, riding John's coattails, which I think history has kind of changed that narrative a little bit. Some of her later works are actually pretty good.
well, I'm gonna give her some credit. This is unbelievable coming from me. I cannot believe I'm gonna give Yoko Ono credit because I dislike her greatly. I really don't, but I don't know her personally. I probably love her. That's why I don't want to say I hate Yoko Ono, right? But the truth of it is, the only thing she ever appeared on that was any good at all by any measure were the backing vocals on the Pros and Cons of Hitchhikers.
I honestly thought you were going to say you enjoyed the cover of Two Virgins.
Oh, I've heard it though. That's good there. That's deep. I mean, yeah. Now, I bet you Shannon enjoyed that. He probably loved it.
I mean, not really. I mean, neither one of them are remarkably any kind of attractive whatsoever. And man, that is a lot of hair. That is so much hair down there.
You are listening to the Balls Out podcast. Like, share, and comment after you subscribe, of course.
So, before I forget it, we got to say that both the Beatles and Frank Zappa had a hand in the creation of heavy metal, right? With Helter Skelter was inspirational to many in the heavy metal universe that popped up.
I agree to that. I will take the unpopular opinion. That's arguably one of the Beatles' worst songs. So,
I agree with it, but I like the energy of it. And then,
we're going to wind up having a very violent conversation before the end of this. But you go right ahead, Kyle. I'm sorry, Robert.
I always felt Helter Skelter was like the Beatles attempting to be hard, and it wasn't. It just like
Neil Young.
Yes, that's another when I bash Neil Young rocking in the free world like Grandpa Grunge, like the boy band gets hard. That's kind of what I refer to as Helter Skelter.
So back to that also segues back to the Stones and the Beatles. So the Beatles tried to manufacture hard, whereas by the tone in their guitars, while the Stones manufactured hard by the subjects being gritty and down to earth. What would you say to that?
I would say this. Some of my favorite hard guitarists songs from the Beatles, I loved I Want to Tell You on the B side of Revolver. Has such a 90s alternative intro there. If you listen to that, you might go, whoa, that sounds like fucking Pearl Jam there. But then when you realize that was George Harrison in 1966, you go, wow. And that's
about Oh Darling.
Ooh. Darling. Oh Darling.
Oh Darling. I could tell you.
I just feel with the Beatles, there was always this schism within the band of I think Ringo and George appreciated the blues and that grittiness more than Paul and John. I mean, that's also evident when you start looking at some of their early solo works. But like John Lennon had like this like, I don't know if he had a disdain for it, because he even admitted like Your Blues off of the White Album was him purely mocking the blues bands. So
he was a better player, I think, than people give him credit for, too, Lennon. But I'm a big disciple as a player of Keith Richards. It's something I explored in my older days. In my younger days, I was concerned with Randy Rhoads and Eddie Van Halen, and I loved Judas Priest, both their guitars, KK Downing, Glenn Tipton. They were highly influential to me, Jimi Hendrix. But then I kind of rediscovered Keith Richards and really listened to it, and I understood what he was doing. And I was watching this movie called Hell, Hell, Rock and Roll, and it had him in it and Chuck Berry and Robert
Masterpiece.
Great movie.
Masterpiece, right? Absolutely. And I understood where Keith Richards was really coming from, and I felt it was important to me as an American guitarist and a Southerner for me to kind of carry on that level of blues and rock and roll and to learn where it come from. And so not to play like Keith Richards, because that's what he's doing. So he's doing the same thing I'm doing. I'm listening to the blues. I'm listening to roots folk music and stuff like that that's old. And I'm listening to old British bluesmen and everybody else I can listen to, because I realize what they're doing is they got this Americana they're carrying forward, right? And it's not that Keith Richards is a better guitar player than anybody else. It's that he gets it and you get it, and you don't even know why, but you know it's rock and roll.
Yeah. You raise a really good point there, because Keith Richards really understood. If you go back and listen to the old Mississippi Delta blues, Keith Richards got it in a way that either Harrison, who eventually I think kind of sort of figured it out, especially hanging out with Clapton and those caliber of guitar players of the day, because everybody wanted to hang out with the freaking Beatles. Come on now, they were the biggest thing since sliced bread at that time.
Oh yeah,
Harrison. On his influence was when he heard the band's music from Big Pink and Brown album, he sought out Robbie Robertson.
Yeah.
And you see that Americana, that earthiness, that grittiness come out in All Things Must Pass. And a lot of his early solo works, and that even for Ringo too. I mean, he had the band play on the album Ringo with him, so.
Oh yeah, he propped Ringo up completely. He basically made 2 or 3 hits for Ringo, and Lennon pitched in on them too. And they basically made money for Ringo after the breakup of the Beatles. It was basically the Beatles without McCartney. And I feel that Harrison was more successful as a solo artist, maybe not in terms of money or touring or album sales, but in terms of how good it was. Even though McCartney's had some stellar moments like Admiral Halsey, right? But in general, I thought that Harrison outshone him in the early part of the breakup of the Beatles. So after the Beatles broke up for the next 5 years, I believe Harrison ruled it.
I'm gonna tell you what, Ringo really embodied the lyric. You just referenced Paul McCartney's my favorite solo album by Paul McCartney, Ram, with Admiral Halsey, and the little dig he makes at John Lennon. You took your lucky break and you broke it in 2. I think out of the 4, Ringo probably had the same business foresight about what a giant economic engine the Beatles had become when they broke up, at the moment that they broke up. And Ringo for a while there was the most successful solo Beatle.
Yeah.
For a while there. Doug was actually the one that educated me to that years ago.
That's a true statement. I mean, Sentimental Journey, Ringo. There were several other ones.
And all the other Beatles were happy to work with him and happy to give him something. He was the safe place to go, as far as reliving that Beatles moment. We'll just go hang out with Ringo for a while. And, he's working on some tunes. We'll pop in there and do something with him.
And It Don't Come Easy is a great song by any measure. It's not just a novelty of Ringo singing. That's a good song, in my opinion, by any measure. It Don't Come Easy.
Do y'all want to jump into the Stones versus the Beatles and just go album per album, starting at a certain point?
What do you want to start? Well, see, that'd be tough because the Stones.
You got a catalog that continues, and to me, you got 2 phases of the Stones.
Anything that came after the 70s, though, ain't going to compare to anything the Beatles has done.
Well, the thing is, when you look at the Stones' discography, they were ever so changing, and you have the first phase whenever they're
Brian Jones.
they're finding themselves from England's New Hit Makers to Out of Our Heads. They kind of find themselves in Out of Their Heads when Satisfaction, which may arguably be the greatest B-side lead-off track ever, appears. And then they go into their second phase where there's like this de-emphasis of Brian Jones, but a re-emphasis of like other things that they're getting the psychedelic and they're getting into a whole bunch of other music. And I really think they find themselves, I think when we get into their Satanic Majesty's Request, I think they find themselves, and I think that's where they traverse their own direction, because you look at the Stones at that point, management at ABCO and Decca Records, Andrew Long Oldham always wanted the Stones to follow suit of the Beatles. They never wanted to lead off. They never wanted to put out their own stuff, and that was one of the primary factors of the Stones wanting to leave ABCO. Was simply because you're not going to let us be who we are, and that's going to be a problem. And to me, when you look at the Stones in comparison, it's really, if you're going to compare them for being these pop bands of different flavors, it's really 64 to 67. After that, the Stones really become their own thing. And that's just how I've always looked at the conversation with between the two groups, because I think they hated with their Satanic Majesty's Request. I'm going to get into this real quick here. Well, I'm going to get into it. They started the recording of that album right around the same time the Beatles were starting Sgt. Pepper. The problem with the Stones and why that album came out after their Satanic Majesty's Request was twofold. Number one, management always wanted to follow the Beatles and were never confident that what the Stones put out would be there. Because remember, their Satanic Majesty's Request was their really first foray deep into psychedelic. But the second reason was self-inflicted, because if you read Andrew Long Oldham's book at the time following with the Stones, he would say during those recording sessions of that album, you never know who was going to show up every day. You may have Keith showing up one day. You may have Mick showing up. Brian Jones may decide he's not in court one day. He's going to show up. So that was an album that just simply got delayed because of self-inflicted wounds. And because Sgt. Pepper dropped, it was a raging success. It was considered courage. It's a new concept. When the Stones followed suit, I think the album dropped in October 67 or November 67. The critics panned it, and I think it was left for dead for many years. But I think through the years, through a lot of retrospective, reassessment, there's still a lot of similarities between the two that you can draw parallels on, but it's people are now respecting the work as it is and as it should.
I mean, I think the biggest comparison between if you're talking about, I just kind of walk back in, but if you're talking about Sgt. Pepper's versus their Satanic Majesty's Request, I mean, the biggest comparison is really just the album covers.
There's even more to that than just the album covers.
No, but I'm thinking that's the biggest thing that made people believe that the Stones were copying the Beatles.
I never felt, though, musically they were copying the Beatles. Their songs are nothing alike. I mean, the Stones even bordered on pure misogyny with "Under My Thumb," which I love that song, by the way.
Well, that's on Aftermath. I mean, that was completely. That's another one of those underrated gems. I know Gomper was very similar to, and I'm pulling up the Sgt. Pepper's track list. I know it when I see it, but that was a song that sounded, and I'm probably not going to remember it off the top of my head, but it's they had a few, like when you listen to it, there's a few stops where you're like, wait a minute, That's just like on Sgt. Pepper's, and that's where I understood the criticism of it, where people say, "Well, the Stones copied the Beatles there," but I've always felt that it was the album that I think, in my opinion, the most important Stones release in their catalog is their Satanic Majesty's Request, because it's that album that gave them the courage to really transcend. Because without that, I don't think they go on to be who they are.
Now, one of the things I found interesting about the Stones is that, in comparison to the Beatles, is that you could say that the Stones' catalog is much more vast and went on for a long time. But if you really want to be truthful about the Stones' catalog, no album they ever released had more than 3 good songs on it. From end to end, they put up. I really like Exile on Main Street is a double album, and they could have made that one record very easily. And they, just the Beatles albums were just more complete from beginning.
Side of Sticky Fingers is just classic after classic.
Well, that's what I was going to go to. I mean, now the Faraway Eyes, I do love that song, but it's basically a novelty, right?
It is.
Dude,
it's funny though. It's hilarious.
Rocky Raccoon is also a novelty, though, right? But there are more good songs on the White Album than there is in the entire. There are Rolling Stones discography from their entire career.
And the White Album is not even their best album.
I think it's Abbey Road, or it's a Revolver, Abbey Road.
That's
the more I've listened to it, the more I'm starting to believe that it is indeed Revolver.
Revolver's a great album.
God, every single freaking song on there just pops in such a way that songs that were recorded in that era didn't pop because of the recording techniques that they were using.
Y'all may be surprised.
Well, I'm sorry.
You may be surprised at this, but my favorite Beatles album is Let It Be.
I'm
not joking.
It's a good.
I love the fucking album.
You like the Spectre version, or do you like Let It Be Naked?
I like the Spectre version.
I do too.
My favorite Beatles album.
You shot a woman.
I'm with
Doug.
I'm with Doug. It is Let It Be for me. I think it has some of the more impactful songs for me.
It's just like they really went with just Phil. I mean, they'd done so many different things, and that's the one thing they had not done. I think they attempted it on the White Album, but the White Album is essentially a John Lennon and a Paul McCartney solo album combined.
Yeah. One of my all-time favorite Beatles song is Across the Universe. And the lyric that I always know at all times is the very start of Across the Universe. Words are flowing out like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither wildly as they slip away across the universe. That to me, that song just impacts me like no other.
Everybody grab your balls. It's the Balls Out podcast.
Maybe one of the sappier songs off the album, The Long and Winding Road.
I was just fixing to bring that one up. I'm sorry.
If you've lived life a little bit, that song hits you in a certain way.
But that song right there was probably the beginning of the end for the Beatles. Because John Lennon hated that fucking song.
Oh my God.
Carry That Way.
God, he hated that song.
I mean, Revolver's my number 2 simply because I love the B side. I love, I Want to Tell You is easily my second or third favorite Beatles song. Dr. Roberts, meh, but Tomorrow Never Knows.
I've listened to Dr. Robert on a loop here recently because the Nug is into the Beatles, and YouTube has been shoving Dr. Robert in my ears, and that is easily among the worst of their catalog.
Oh,
easily.
Absolutely. But Tomorrow Never Knows.
But look, as a page in history, though, that's a pretty important song.
It is an important song. Tomorrow Never Knows. I think of Mad Men. I think of Don Draper. How do you put on your hi-fi the B side of Revolver and just nail the last song on the record and just start?
Yeah.
I always get a kick out of that scene. But I just love that entire. Good Day Sunshine is a very good pop song that I can dig behind, and I enjoy In Your Bird Can Sing as well. The following track on.
But I mean, all of these songs, though, and again, I would strongly recommend listening to the most recent mix of Revolver, the one that
Giles Martin.
The one that Giles is involved in, and I'm gonna tell you one thing right now. That the sounds that they're using on that album is just I can't stress it enough how futuristic it was when it first came out. The way those songs burst from the album when they first start, rather than just, like, and we're kind of used to that because we're used to hearing things on the radio burst from the radio, certain songs, but that's where it all came from. The recording techniques that they were, really inventing out of thin air at that particular point.
Oh, absolutely.
Backwards guitar solos and things like that. That didn't exist before the Beatles came in. And that's why really this conversation is whimsical to me, because the Beatles left such a deeper footprint on the music industry as a whole, not just rock and roll.
Well, this is how you know that, because Brian Jones copied the use of sitars on the Stones music after hearing the Beatles.
What a great idea. Why don't we do this? Yeah, and every single Ozzy Osbourne, who I referenced earlier, that's why he got into music to begin with, just like a lot of other musicians in the 60s in London.
I would counter that with Tom Petty has always said, the Beatles may have been musical perfection, but it's the Rolling Stones that made me believe I could be a musician and do this thing. Steve, a lot of the members in Bruce.
Yeah, but if taken in the wrong context, though, that could also be a slur too.
Absolutely. That's what I was thinking is that really
That's
a compliment?
Because I thought, I don't really want to say. I don't think. How do I say this? Keith Richards is not much better than I am.
In a way, maybe he was saying the Beatles, musical perfection. The Stones, that let me know that I could do this.
Yeah,
and
you could match a few notes up, and as long as you look cool doing it, hey man, just roll with it.
But the Stones did elevate to a near Beatles-esque level of playing ability around the time of Sticky Fingers. I do have to admit that, right?
Oh, absolutely, man. I'm going to tell you what. I will put. Oh God, it was Give Me Shelter. I'll put that up against just about any Beatles tune, as far as recording process, as far as production, as far as the whole kid and caboodle. Oh man, those are some big, beautiful songs, man.
Yeah.
And they just go in places that you don't expect that the song would go.
The jazz
I have to
thing.
admit that I just recently sat down and started paying attention to Mick Jones.
Yeah.
Yes.
To the Mick Jones years and what he brought to the Rolling Stones. And
Better musicianship.
It was totally amazing. And it really, it's a shame that they couldn't ride that all the way through the 70s.
To me, you look at the Stones in my opinion, from Aftermath to Exile on Main Street. These are now seen. At the time people weren't big fans, but to me, that is like the core canon of the Stones catalog. One of my favorite things is Brian Jones playing the marimba on Under My Thumb.
I love that too. I've got a marimba, actually. I own one.
You look at Between the Buttons and their Satanic Majesty's Request, they get into a little bit of psychedelic. But I think when they finally get pissed off enough and they really wanted to start writing their own shit, you got Beggar's Banquet, you got Let It Bleed, you got Sticky Fingers, and you got Exile on Main Street. And in between, you got one of the most iconic live albums ever, and Get Your Yayas Out. How can you not love Charlie Watts with a shirt with female tits on it in a donkey?
You're right.
Iconic Keith Richards Midnight Rambler guitar solo live from Madison Square Garden on there. That that run is as good as a run as any 4-album run ever. You pick any artist, you pick any 4 consecutive albums.
But we're not picking any artist and we're not picking any consecutive albums. We're talking about the Beatles versus the Stones, and you will talk about a 4-album run.
Well,
starting with Revolver. We'll go ahead and leave Rubber Soul out of it, but why not? That's even though that's an iconic album as well.
Remember,
so we'll start with Revolver.
Then
I went Aftermath to Exile on Main Street. That's a nice 7-8 album run there for the Stones.
Then I guess I have to include Rubber Soul here, then, don't I?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's.
I mean, even Meet the Beatles has some. I mean, just completely just iconic songs on it.
Oh, and I mean, you could go back. You could even go like for the Stones, even go back into their early. Like I'm not even counting out of our heads in that run either. That has Satisfaction on it. You know, there's like I said, both bands bring a different punch to the equation. It's what you seek in the music. You know, it doesn't end in 1970. It goes on, and you got great albums and iconic albums like Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, Some Girls, which is an absolute dynamic album.
It is a good album. Some Girls is a good album. I love
good.
Some Girls.
Tattoo You is another great B-side. Great
Emotional
B-side.
Rescue was a great song. No, Waiting on a Friend. Waiting on a Friend. I loved Waiting on a Friend.
You know, you get, you know, Steel Wheels was another great album. And
it's not.
It's not Dirty really, Work is shit. 1986's Dirty Work is absolute dog.
Yeah, if really, I mean, you brought up Steel Wheels. So anything else after Steel Wheels, we don't have to talk about that.
So I have a question, Kyle, and this right here is going to make the point that I really want to make. And since the Stones has been touring since 1970, and the Beatles actually quit touring in '66, if I'm correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the Stones have been touring since 1970 till now. All of that promotion of their albums, and has it what has it resulted in album sales versus the Beatles?
I don't get into album sales.
I get that, but I'm just asking because I think it is relevant here. Because we're not talking about a new band, we're talking about a band who hasn't hit a live stage. I guess you can count the Rooftop.
Yeah, that is their last live performance. They also did They also did a performance on Eric Idle's show of Let It Be.
Yeah. When you get into chart, if you're going to get into chart,
I'm not worried about chart. I'm talking about albums, just album sales.
Let me finish. If you get into charts, album sales, and whatnot, this is where you can skew arguments. The Beatles are always going to crush everyone in it. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, but why?
But here's the thing.
But why? That's the question.
Well, that was the medium of and I'm going to get into something on that. Let me have a nice long point here, Doug. So you could then, if you're going to use the logic of album sales, there's Alanis Morissette albums, Britney Spears albums, Shania Twain albums that have outsold.
Hey, Jagged Little Pill slaps, bitch.
Some of those albums have outsold Led Zeppelin. Some of them they've outsold Pink Floyd.
So I have a question, and I really don't know the answer to this, but who sold more records since 1970?
Hey,
I know you're not done, but you got to think about this.
Let me get through my point. So to me, it's an inexact science to say, well, because artist A sold more than artist B, that makes them better. Because then the whole artistic thing and why you look at art subjectivity doesn't matter. You look at the Velvet Underground.
I mean, I could follow you as far as that goes, as far as what you're saying. But then again, you're also talking about certain other. You're talking about other bands and other albums. We're talking about the Rolling Stones and versus the Beatles. That's where we're at with this thing.
We're talking about.
I hate to have to ref this conversation, but yeah, I don't want to veer too far off course because we can slide that goalpost over a little bit. I mean, you're going to have to slide it over quite a bit.
No,
but you are still talking about a band who were promoting their albums while touring against a band that hasn't toured.
Steel Wheels had a big tour that came through Birmingham. Living Colour opened up for them. I remember that.
Hell, I seen the Stones in 1977 at Referendum.
I bet that was a good show.
One of the other metrics that is starting to become more prevalent, also, and which again I don't subscribe to, is streaming and how many people are listening. And one of my favorite channels on YouTube is called Parlogram Auctions. And Andrew is as good as a Beatles historian as you're ever going to listen to on there. And he made a good point on the one with the Beatles trying to embrace Dolby Atmos. When you look at the metrics of what people are listening to, the Beatles' biggest problem is the younger audiences aren't listening to them as much as younger people are listening to other older
Well,
artists.
and
Like
here's why,
Led
because you
Zeppelin.
just brought up streaming. The Beatles didn't get into streaming until very late in the game.
Well,
And then was Apple.
it was in 2011 or so.
Yeah, and that's
But
a
keep in
that's a
mind,
10
we're
year
talking
10 year
10 years.
gap that they don't have the same
I'm
exposure
talking
that
recent.
So,
I'm
so
talking
You know.
correct me if I'm wrong, but Spotify is your biggest platform, right?
correct.
Okay, so the Beatles are sitting at about 31 million monthly listeners, and I believe the Stones are at about 24 million.
So the thing that you don't see, and this is what he brought up on his channel, is look at the demographics. Whenever they release demographic reports on certain artists, the Beatles own the older crowd, which they will never have a problem. The thing is, it's the younger crowd where you're seeing, like, the Stones pick up younger people, Fleetwood Mac picking up younger people.
That's
That's
because of
the
TikTok.
challenge the Beatles. That's the challenge the Beatles have going forward.
well,
This
and
is
again,
why-
and
this
again,
is
you're also
why-
talking
let me
about
finish my
places
point,
that
Shannon.
places
Let
that
me finish my point.
Fleetwood Mac, for example, we'll just say Fleetwood Mac. Stevie Nicks has recently appeared in American Horror Story.
Let me
So,
finish.
again, as long as you have some sort of visibility in the public, I believe that kind of gives you the edge as far as that goes.
So the point I'm trying to drive home at, part of the reason you're seeing the big news of Paul McCartney's finishing the last Beatles song via AI, and through a lot of these Dolby Atmos initiatives, is keeping a presence, keeping things going, because they see the numbers. Look, this is commercially the greatest band ever. I'm not going to argue the point that the numbers bear that out. But when you start analyzing the numbers, they see a problem. This is why they're approaching that. Again, when it comes, in my opinion, the reason I'm always been Team Stones, and again, I love the Beatles. I own both catalogs in their entirety here at my house, so it's not like I hate one over the other. I relate more to them. I feel like they're just timeless and ageless because they're like a chameleon. They've adjusted over and over through time. They've experimented with things. There's been things that have been awesome. There have been things that absolutely blew dog shit, like Dirty Work. Like, I can't remember the music video I sent you, Shannon, in the one post, but that blue dog shit I remember. I think it was from Dirty Work too. But it part of why I feel is like there's something to be said for the artists that stood the test of time, stood the ability of experimenting through different artists, like different genres and everything, and dabbling in things and just being there. To me, I'm not trying to put the Beatles down. I mean, they will always be, in my mind, the most influential band ever. But to me, the greatest band is the one who started on day one, and then they're still doing it when they're 78 years old.
Well, hold on now. I thought you
a couple of them are.
I thought you had Led Zeppelin above the Stones.
I do.
I go back and forth. That one, Led Zeppelin's like my 1, and Stones are my 2. It goes back. It's so hard.
You are listening to the Balls Out Podcast.
您正在收听 Balls Out 播客。
What is everyone's top 5 albums of each the Stones and the Beatles?
Oh, so for me, I'm going to say Let It Bleed, Exile on Main Street, Sticky Fingers, Sympathy for the Devil, and also like I don't know why, but I love Some Girls. I think Some Girls is up there.
That's a great record.
Let's see
Top
here.
5 Stones.
For Stones, let's go.
So you said Some Girls at number 5. What'd you have at number 4?
Number 4. Number 4 would be Satanic Majesties. I do like that album. It took me a while for that album to grow on me. That album wasn't even in my top 5 for the longest. When I first listened to it, I guess I probably wasn't in the right frame of mind. I don't know, but 3, keeping with that sympathy for the devil. Yeah, Exile on Main Street and Let It Bleed.
Okay,
that's where I'm gonna go with it.
So my 5 of the Stones. Oh, this is always a tough one. So number 5 for me is going to be Aftermath. Again, I think Under My Thumb, Brian Jones on the marimba might be.
That is my favorite Stones song.
That is way up there for me. I love the UK version. I will emphasize that. Sorry, US version with Painted Black. You don't get the nod here. I love Under My Thumb, and I love the song Mother's Little Helper. So, and plus the purple black cover in silhouette of the Stones is one of my favorite ones of all time. Number 4 for me would be. This is a tough one. I'm gonna go with Tattoo You, and Start Me Up is, I always think of Windows 95 forever and ever. Unfortunately, that's where I'm at.
I always think of Viagra for some reason or another, but
I love the song Neighbors and Little TNA, which is on side 1. To me, side 2, which is a little bit more of a balladly side of the Stones, I think it's a perfect side between Worried About You, Tops, Heaven, No Crying, No Use in Crying, and Waiting on a Friend, which is a fantastic song. So, I mean, again, Tattoo You is at 4. Number 3, I'm going to go with Sticky Fingers. I think side A is absolutely a perfect side. I mean, you start off with Brown Sugar, which they can't play anymore. You got Wild Horses. You got Can't You Hear Me Knocking, which is I
got a bone to pick with Brown Sugar, and it ain't because of the lyrical content either.
Yeah, it Sways, another great. Like, I love that whole side. Absolutely fantastic. Number 2 would be Let It Bleed. Gimme Shelter is, I mean, how words can't describe it.
That song is freaking amazing. Yes. From beginning to end, it's just wow.
Midnight Rambler, Honky Tonk. You can't always get what you want. Just an absolute
Honky Tonk Women's another one that I take exception to, because I will tell anybody this that ever wants to bring it up. Rye Cooter. Oh, just Honky Tonk. I'm sorry.
Completely different song.
But Honky Tonk Women, before it comes up, I'm going to go ahead and get on the soapbox since I went ahead and unleashed it. Rye Cooter had a strong hand in writing that song.
So it's just always been a favorite of mine. It's always been a staple. I spent a lot of money, actually $10, on a gold-plated at Super Audio CD. Let It Bleed. So it's definitely one of my favorites. My number 1, I have to go with Exile on Main Street. Another one of my all-time favorite songs. It's called Soul Survivor. I think it's the closing track. Is an all-time favorite. One of the coolest things I got. I don't know if you guys know the alternative folk band Two Cow Garage.
Who?
Two Cow Garage.
No, I've never heard of them.
Okay, another fantastic act. That might be one of our next segments on newer acts or bands you never heard of that you should check out. So their guitar, I think Shane Sweeney's their guitarist, and he does pen etchings of quotes from famous songs. And one of my prized possessions, one of my favorite things I own, is a Shane Sweeney etching of Soul Survivor lyrics that I have in my house. I love, Rocks Off. That whole album. It is a perfect blend of grit, blues, and Western music. Love the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
One of the best. One of the best drinking albums that ever existed.
That's true.
Absolutely. Yeah. Doug, what's your top 5? Yeah, I want to hear Doug's 5 Stones albums.
All right, so my number 5 is Out of Our Heads.
That's a good one.
Just because of satisfaction and the impact of the song. They were mainly covering songs at that time.
Oh, yeah.
I like Beggar's Banquet.
That's fantastic.
Awesome album. That's my number 4. What were you saying, Kyle?
Stray Cat Blues, I think, is off that album, and I love that song.
Not to be confused with Stray Cat Strut.
Right.
Sympathy for the Devil, Street Fighting Man. I mean, it's a great album.
Hell yeah.
Let It Bleed.
Oh yeah.
Let It Bleed is my number 3.
That's
Most of my stuff is going to be in the 60s. I can go ahead and tell you that. Can't always get what you want. I mean, that's all I need to say. That song, really, the version they did on Rock and Roll Circus with Brian Jones over the side. Awesome. All right, Aftermath will be my number 2. Yeah, everything's going to be in the 60s. I can tell you. Sorry, I haven't been to let's see, Under My Thumb. What else is on here? Mother's Little Helper. All right, so number 1 is Their Satanic Majesty's Request. There's not as many big songs on that album as there is some of their other albums, but I can listen to the whole album, and it's about the only Stones album that I can listen to the whole fucking album.
Interesting.
Hell yeah.
All right. So that's it. Everybody's given their top 5, I believe, right?
Of the stuff.
Yeah, for the Stones.
Yeah, let's do the Beatles.
Well,
I'll pop the cherry here. A number 5 for me would be Rubber Soul. Let's see here. I got to choose carefully here because I got some really good albums to choose from. But number 5 would be Rubber Soul. Number 4, which used to be my number 1, will definitely be the White Album. The White Album for me, for some reason or another, doesn't slap as hard as it used to in some spots, but there are some just completely undeniable moments on both albums of that recording.
The theme from Life
Of course,
Goes On.
Bungalow Bill. I mean, Jesus, that's a great song.
Bungalow Bill, not so much, but Bob brought up Rocky Raccoon earlier. There's something about that song that really gives me chills. It is in a way that like the old Johnny Cash tunes, which I really think that McCartney was trying to channel when he recorded that one. But I mean, there's some really
he was trying to channel his inner Johnny Cash.
Happiness is a warm gun. For a song about something as lethargic as heroin, boy, it sure is a jumpy number. Let's see here, where are we at? Number 3. That would be. Oh shit. Number 3. Yeah. This is. I mean, This is really, really, really tough. Number 3. Fudge. I guess I'm going to have to say Abbey Road.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, Sgt. Pepper's, and number 1, of course, would be Revolver.
Hell yeah. I guess
I can sit and extrapolate for hours on each and every track on the album, but I mean, God, what can I say that hadn't been said before about every single one of those albums? Oh my God, they're just slam-packed, chock full of just amazing moments that I think, that's the thing, is that they transcend mere mortal musical moments. We're talking about the blues and, the grimy and dirt and this, that, and the other. This is a completely ethereal experience altogether with some of these albums, particularly Sgt. Pepper's. That blew everybody's minds when that dropped. Everybody's. Nobody had ever heard anything like that before, even the guys that recorded it.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Absolutely.
There you go.
All right, somebody go next.
I'm going to go ahead and do my 5. And my number 5 is The Magical Mystery Tour. The Magical Mystery Tour is interesting to me because it shows how to make cheesy pop that somehow seems genuine. And the songs like, even though it's totally contrived, right? Penny Lane is a great song. And then my number 4 is Sgt. Pepper's, because it opened up so much recording territory, even though I believe many of the songs are overrated, but A Day in a Life is a great song by Eddie Measure. One of the greatest of all time. Yeah, Yesterday, Nowhere Man. But anyway, so my number 3 is Rubber Soul, and obviously it has Norwegian wood on it, so therefore it's a big deal to me. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. And then Revolver's, I loved it, and it goes back and forth between Rubber Soul and Revolver, but I'm gonna go with you guys on that one and go with Revolver. And I just don't know which one I love better, Abbey Road or the White Album. But I really believe the best work they ever put out is Abbey Road, so I'm gonna go with Abbey Road.
Okay, so I guess it's my turn. So when I look at it, I'm always torn between these two at number 5, and it's Help and Rubber Soul. And I'm going to just be the contrarian and go Help, because it's such a good folk rock album. It's so different. Ticket to Ride's a good catchy pop tune. Yesterday's, I think, their opus, which is on the B side there, absolutely fantastic, and I've always enjoyed listening to that record. Number 4 is this is the dicey part for me. I'm gonna go with I'm gonna go with that's 1, 2. I'm in my head here. I'm making sure I don't get. I'm gonna go Abbey Road. It's, to me, I think what I love about this album is I think it's them becoming the rock band that a lot of people, like all their contemporaries, became. And to me, it stands with any of the albums of the period. You listen to Come Together, Paul McCartney said it's Chuck Berry playing, but just slowed down. I Want You, She's So Heavy. Maxwell Silverhammer's funny. The George Harrison, like the little drum fills at the beginning. I think they're drum fills at the beginning of Something, get me every time. That's up there between that and the guitar solo of Day Tripper. When people say, when you think of the Beatles, what's the first sound that comes into your head? It's either one of those two. And then I always love Here Comes the Sun, but who doesn't love Who Comes the Sun? Number 3 is the White Album. It's, to me, the Beatles version of Exile on Main Street, and I love how decadent and just how all over the place and grandiose it is, because even though there's songs I absolutely despise, like Your Blues and Helter Skelter, there's songs I absolutely love. How do you not love Dear Prudence? How do you not love the theme from Life Goes On? Obla Dee, Obla Da. While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Blackbird. Julia. The Birthday Song makes me laugh and always puts a smile on my face. And then, even though people hate the number 9, that it makes me laugh every time I hear it. I don't know why. It just does. So, White Album number 3.
Well,
and
You know what really creeped me out?
Hmm.
You know what really creeped me out? When the Manson family went in and wrote on the walls with the blood, wrote Julia. That was so fucked up.
That was fucked up.
No, wait a minute. It wasn't Julia. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I get you now.
So who hates number 9?
I don't.
Revolution.
I found it to be.
No, I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I do too.
That was my number 3. So my last 2, and I mentioned them earlier. Number 2's Revolver. To me, it's just like a lot of the guys hit a lot of the same things. I mentioned this earlier. I think you get a lot of the iconic Beatles sounds from this album. Like when you drop the needle on Revolver on side A and Taxman comes on, that
my daughter's favorite song, I might add.
Right? That's another one of their great little things. Eleanor Rigby, Here, There, and Everywhere, Yellow Submarine. And then, like I told you guys, the B side's one of my absolute favorites of their whole entire catalog. Good Day Sunshine's one that'll put a smile on your face. Dr. Robert, I laugh at. Tomorrow Never Knows. I love the creepiness of it. I think that kind of was that experimental stuff that would lead into what Sgt. Pepper's would become. But like I mentioned earlier, I Want to Tell You's arguably, I would say it's in my second or third favorite Beatles song. I love the Harrison opening guitar. It has that dirty, grungy. It's so timeless. I love it to death.
The guitar sound on that album, the whole entire album is just, I mean, flawless. Oh my gosh.
You know, and then my number one, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, is Let It Be. And, you know, when I listen to music, what's the most important component to me is what impacts me. And Let It Be is one of those albums that impacts the hell out of me. And I when I first heard in my life Across the Universe, you know, it just took me somewhere that I don't know how else to describe it. It was so, there was like a creepiness, but yet there was like a fragility to it. You know, again, like I told you guys earlier, one of my all-time favorite lyrics are the first two bars of Across the Universe. Words are flowing out like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither wildly as they sip away across the universe. I mean, I will probably remember that till the day I die. And it might be the last words I speak on this earth. I'm not even joking when I say that. But I mean, when you go through, you know, the long and winding road, that's McCartney being as sappy as ever, but it's, you know, when you're at a very vulnerable point in your life, that song really hits and stings. I love the George Harrison For You Blue right before Get Back to close the album out. And then it's just, you know, how's it go? Words of wisdom, let it be, let it be. I just love the song Let It Be. So, and I just love the iconic simple black cover, the photos of the four, because it really, when you watch the Peter Jackson documentary, when you watch anything about that, like that period, they were really at the point, you know, they were done as a band, and they were, the artwork's very powerful understanding that moment.
Number 5, I'm going with Sgt. Pepper's. It's a great album. It's probably been talked up a little bit more than from the, you know, I don't think it's our top album, obviously, or I wouldn't have it at number 5, but it is a great album. I really didn't like George Harrison's sitar stuff. I'm going to go ahead and say that because a lot of people probably disagree with me.
I didn't think it was necessary.
I think George Harrison really...
No, I didn't either. There was a lot of it.
But yeah, A Day in the Life, great song. I mean, there's just great songs all the way through the album.
Day in the Life is that's probably my favorite Beatles thing, because that encapsulates every great thing about the Beatles. Every great thing from every individual member of the Beatles as a unit.
Absolutely.
Plus that kick-ass orchestra.
The drums are amazing in that fucking song.
Everybody's performance in that song is just jaw-dropping.
The drums really jump out to me, though.
Oh, God, they so do.
Okay, number 4, I'm going with the White Album, which it's a great album, and it used to be my favorite Beatles album at one point, and it kind of wears on you. It's a long album, and it's got some shit kind of shuffled in.
Don't pass me by, don't make me blue. Yeah.
My cat hates that fucking
Let's do it in the road.
I do too.
How about let's do it in the road?
I fucking hate that song. Gosh, and I'm glad somebody's finally brought it up, because anytime that I bring that up, you always get that one guy, oh man, come on now, that's a fun song, blah, blah, this. No, it's not. It is a stupid, corny ass song, and it really has no place in the Beatles catalog at all.
Except there it is. Except there
it is, like a big turd in the middle of the floor. Yep. Somebody's shitting the floor.
I'm going to say John. The White Album is the first time that George really started to shine as a contemporary of John and Paul. As a writer. He didn't get a lot of chances at it, but Piggies, great fucking song. While My Guitar Gently Weeps, great fucking song. Even the song Long Time, if you've heard it, is on my version, it's really low, and you have to turn your shit up really loud to get a good listen at it. But George Harrison really started to blossom on the White Album.
Yeah.
Okay, number 3. I'm going to go back a little bit. I really like the soundtrack to Hard Day's Night. It's got a lot of good shit on it. Things We Said Today. I mean, really just all the way through it. The whole album, that's another album I can listen through.
You know what that whole experience, that Hard Day's Night experience taught me? That Paul's grandfather was a very, very clean man.
Yeah, do you know what that's
naughty
about?
clean man, though.
Do you know what that
He
reference
was.
is about, Shannon?
No.
Okay, a lot of people don't realize this. There was a show in England called Steptoe and Son.
Which was the precursor to Sanford and Son.
Right, and the old man that played Paul's granddad was the Fred Sanford character of Steptoe and Son, and he was always dirty looking. So he didn't look dirty in the Beatles movie.
No,
so
he was clean. He was clean
wanted
as fuck in that movie.
Right, as
Very
a
clean
pop
man.
culture reference for that time, they kept talking about how clean he was.
He was cheeky though. Bob hit the nail on the head. That was a cheeky, clean motherfucker.
2, I'm going with Revolver. Revolver is sometimes my number 1, but right now it's my number 2. And everybody else has already talked about Revolver, so I'm not going to waste time going down the songs. My favorite song from the album is Only Sleeping, but I love the whole album.
Great song.
Let It Be, my top album. It's got this really weird vibe. And a lot of people don't realize this, that album was recorded. It's not their last recorded album. It's their second to the last. Abbey Road is their last recorded album.
Yes.
Which I did not put on my list, but I do love Abbey Road too. It's really difficult for me to do a top 5 of Beatles albums.
See, that's like me with the Stones.
If we did
Man, we could do. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You could do this 2 months from now, and I'll have a completely different top 5 altogether. A couple of the albums might still be there, but a couple new ones might creep in the list.
Hell yeah.
Killer.
All right, guys. Talk to you next week.
See you next week.
Y'all have a good.
Later.
Later.